I was so inspired when I watched Jenny at Missouri Star's video, The Whirligig Star, that I wanted to make it. But I said to myself, there is absolutely no way that I am cutting all those pieces out with the rotary cutter. I decided to translate that pattern into Accuquilt language. You want to see how I did it? Stay tuned. Hi, my name is Tammy. I'm a human, and I believe that quilting has the power to connect us stitch by stitch. Thanks for tuning in today. Now let me explain to you what I did with the Whirligig Star block. So here it is. These are the fabrics that I chose to make this block. And let me show you what components I used. Rotary cutting pieces for quilt blocks is absolutely not my jam. I don't like it, I'm not good at it, and I don't want to do it. So I invested with my own pennies into the Accuquilt cutting system. So let me show you the dies I used to recreate the Whirligig Star block by Jenny at Missouri Star. So first I use the mix and match block set, and this is the 6-inch box set. And in addition to the generic mix and match block, I use the companion set. Let me show you in detail which dies were used. So I used the Accuquilt Go Me cutter to cut out all the shapes. I also have a Go Big, which I prefer, but I know a lot of you are looking at starting the Accuquilt system and you're looking at the Go Me. So I wanted to showcase that here, but again, my favorite is the Go Big Electric. So here are the pieces of the Whirligig Star block by Missouri Star that I converted to Accuquilt language, I say. So I used this shape, which is the half square triangle. It's shape number 3 in the mix and match box. I use this die to cut these pieces. I use the square that's in the 6-inch mix and match, is shape number 1, to cut these pieces. I use shape number 8, which is the rectangle. It's also included in the 6-inch mix and match box. And I use this shape to cut these 4 pieces. Now this shape is the chisel, and it is in the 6-inch companion set. And I use this portion of the die to cut these 4 pieces. The last die I used was the half square triangle, and it's shape number 5, and it's also included in the mix and match box set. And this die was used to cut these 4 corner pieces. Let me show you how I sew these pieces together. At this phase of the process, the half square triangle has been sewn to the chisel piece, and these 2 half square triangles have been sewn together. So the next step is to take this unit and sew it to the rectangle here, and I will make a 1/4-inch seam that goes on this edge of the unit, and then it'll look like this essentially. I will take these half square triangle units, sew this together. There will be a 1/4-inch seam here, and then it will look like that. Stay tuned. At this phase of the project, you can see that I've sewn my half square triangles together to create this unit here. And you notice these extra little threads at the edge? I like to chain piece when I'm working on the block like this, and so I have discovered this little gadget called the Blade Saver Thread Cutter. And what it is it has a used 45 miller rotary blade in here, and what it does is when you slip your threads of fabric here, it slices it and cuts them apart, and it is the most amazing time-saving thing ever. Again, it's called a Blade Saver Thread Cutter. Here you can see that I've taken the rectangle shape and the half square triangle and chisel shape, and I've sewn those together. And I pressed my seams open at this point in the project because to me, it just reduces that extra bulk that comes with sewing all these elements together. So let me show you where we are in the project. So what's been completed is I have sewn my half square triangles together to essentially create that portion of the block. And then I've also sewn together my rectangle shape and my half square triangle and my chisel to create this section of the block. So what's left over are the four corners of the block and to basically put the puzzle together. So I'm going to show you how I do that in the next segment. Stay tuned. Here is the center of the Whirligig Star block that has been arranged in the order that I'm going to sew it. So what I'm going to do is take this piece, this unit, flip it over on top here as such, put a 1/4 inch seam down here. I'm going to take this piece, place it over here, sew a 1/4 inch seam down there. This is the outer border of the Whirligig Star block. And as you can see, there are several units that need to be sewn together. So everyone has their own sort of order of operation, if you will. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and sew it here, put a 1/4 inch seam that way. Take this one, sew it here, 1/4 inch seam that way. I'm going to press it open, and at this phase, I'm just going to press my seams to the dark side. No longer will I press them open because the bulk is starting to increase, and pressing them open just makes these weird joins in the center, and it's difficult to sew. Once these are sewn and pressed open, next I will take this square, sew it here, and then this square, sew it here, 1/4 inch seam here, 1/4 inch seam here, press it to the dark side, then that will be connected. What will be remaining is the Whirligig Star itself. So once that unit is completed, I'll press it open and it'll sit in the center here. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to that phase in the project, so make sure you continue watching. We are in the home stretch of completing this Whirligig Star block created by Jenny and her team over at the Missouri Star Quilt Company. So let me show you what the finished block will look like. It looks like this. So what I have left to do is I need to connect the Whirligig Star to the legs, as Jenny calls them. So I am going to take this unit, I'm going to flip it over like this, and I do what I call strategic pinning. And what that means is I often use, at this phase in completing a block, I often use 1 or 2 pins just to stabilize this top piece with the bottom piece so that I can maintain my points. So as you can see here, one of the beautiful things about using the Accuquilt system is not only does it cut off the dog ears for you, but it gives you your 1/4 inch seam. So you see here, this extra white fabric, that is your 1/4 inch seam. Same thing applies here. You can see how there's a perfect point right there, but then this right here is the 1/4 inch seam that needs to be sewn here. So when I say strategic pinning, I essentially flip it over and I match it up as such, and then I do this little thing that's like a little peekaboo, and I peek in and just kind of take it over and see that point. I see that pink point and the green point, and I do my best to line it up. And then I place a pin here and here and start sewing my 1/4 inch seam along this edge. And so what happens is when I'm sewing my 1/4 inch seam, when I get right at this point, a stitch or two before my point, I stop and I take a peek and I do my best to make sure that those points, see those points there? I do my best to make sure those points are still lined up, and I go ahead and sew with my needle directly into that point and keep going with my seam. I'm going to complete that step now, and I'm going to press all that bulk open using my steam fast iron with no steam and using my clapper. Once that's done, so imagine that being sewn together, I'll repeat the process for this side. When I complete those steps, I'll come back and show you what it looks like. We are down to the last 2 seams before this Whirligig Star block is completed. Thank you to Jenny and her team over at Missouri Star Quilt Company for designing such a beautiful block. Now, let me show you how this all came out. So, here's the front side. Here's the back side. As you can see here, there's a lot of bulk with all these seams. And so I pressed these seams in the direction that they wanted to go. So on this side, I pressed this way, which is to my left. And on this side, actually, it's the same thing. And you can see here that I am not perfect, and nor do I strive to be. I strive to do the best I can and get this project done. So what you can see here is that when I sewed this seam, there's like a little nub of it here because I didn't lock the seam in the beginning. But guess what? When you flip it over, nobody's gonna see it. And by the time you add the batting and the backing and sew it all together, nobody's gonna see it. But let me show you the outcome of my strategic pinning technique. Look at that. Look at how well that point matches up. Again, on this side, I use my strategic pinning technique. And if you guys want me to show you more in detail how I do that strategic pinning technique real time, just comment down below and let me know, like, hey, Tammy, like, yeah, we'd like to see a video on the details of how you do your strategic pinning because those points look on point. So the last 2 seams here are to connect this one here and this one here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it. I am going to turn this one over like this. And again, do that strategic pinning technique. Now, I'm warning you guys in advance. At this stage, it may not look so pretty, my points, when I'm done. Only because I do my best to make a consistent 1/4 inch seam, but sometimes it gets wonky. And this square piece and this square piece, because it wasn't cut, like, you know, a half square triangle, it was just like a solid piece. There may be like 1/8 of an inch more fabric on either side. So it may be a little harder, for me to match that seam up perfectly, but I'm still going to implement my strategic pinning technique. And we're going to see how it all turns out. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to flip it over, but it'll be turned this way. And going to, you know, look here, line this up, put a pin, do my best to line those points up, put a pin, same thing here, stitch everything together and come back and the block will be completed. Stay tuned and comment down below and let me know what you guys are thinking thus far. Ta-da! The block is complete. Let me show you what it looks like in detail. My strategic pinning technique did not fail me. I think these points look pretty good. They're not perfect, but they're good enough for my taste. I am all about completion versus perfection. Here is the back of the block. You can see some of the seams are pressed open. Some of them are pressed to the left, to the right. There's some little hiccup there, but guess what? Nobody's going to see it because all they're going to see is this. This block finishes to 12.5 once it's placed in whatever project I'm going to use. It'll be a 12-inch block. Some of the things I learned as far as tips for success in making this block is I always start with pre-starched fabric. In my opinion, it just makes it easier to work with. It makes it easier to sew. It makes it easier to press and use your clapper. I just think pre-starched fabric is the best. The other thing I used was the Accuquilt cutting system and their dies to create such perfectly cut pieces. I think that using a consistent 1/4 inch seam is also key. Without using a consistent 1/4 inch seam, I wouldn't have been able to achieve these beautiful points. I use a dry iron. I use a steam fast iron without water to press the seams open, or to the left side, to the dark side, etc. I used a clapper to lay on top of the pieces once they were pressed so that I can hold that nice crisp edge. And I also used a little patience. I get in a hurry and I get easily frustrated. And so that's why I use the Accuquilt cutting system, because if I were rotary cutting this, there'd be no way it would look this nice. It would turn out to be a hot mess. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you to Jenny and the team over at Missouri Star for designing such a beautiful quilt block, and Accuquilt for creating such amazing products. This video was not sponsored. I bought everything with my own hard-earned pennies. The next step is, I don't know what I'm going to use this block for. I'm not sure what project I'll create, so you're going to have to stay tuned, subscribe, and see what this ultimately turns into.